Give her up there in order to have her edit a magazine.
It's actually, she's even more powerful now because usually publishers hire editors, but the publisher, we never really had a publisher at the time of the kid. We had the marketing director of the youth thing for the whole magazine did it. We decided we needed a publisher, and I said, fine, but I want Claudia to hire the
Okay. Hello.
to set up the standard here that she hired the publisher, not vice versa. So
Welcome.
she apparently has hired one.
Shut up.
So, yesterday.
It's good to see you. Thank you for coming. People around the doors, why don't you take your seats? We're about to begin this great Friday night panel. Hi, I'm Victor Navasky. Yay! Friendly crowd. I'll stop there. I'm the publisher of The Nation. On behalf of Katrina Vanden Heuvel, our staff, let me welcome you all to tonight's panel. I want to start by thanking Don Hazen and his amazing colleagues for bringing us all together in this second Media and Democracy Congress. A number of people, including the panelists, have asked me what the real subject of tonight's panel is, and like you, I can hardly wait to find out. Whatever it is, I suspect that this panel is like almost no other at the Congress in one way. Virtually all of the other workshops, panels, and conversations on the mainstream media are about the mainstream media. The idea of this panel, however, is not to talk about so much as to have a conversation, an argument, an exchange, an exploration with, to bring together the representatives and non-representatives from independent, alternative, and establishment publications and broadcasting. And I must say, looking at this distinguished galaxy of folks on the platform, that I can't think of a more appropriate crew to pull this off, and you're lucky to be here. I'm going to plunge into the middle and introduce the panelists very briefly and then turn this over to Bill Moyers. We have with us tonight, second from my left, Katha Pollitt.
Bravo.
In addition to her famous letters to the editor, Katha writes a bi-weekly column for The Nation, subject to debate. It has been called by the Washington Post, speaking of establishment media, can't get much more establishment than that, quote, the best place to go for original thinking on the left. Of course, what the Washington Post thinks of the left is another question, but that's... Katha is, of course, a poet, and her book, An Arctic Traveler, has won the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award. It's a better award, I think. Her work has appeared in many publications, including the New York Times. She's appeared on plenty of establishment programs, as well as her life that we know about. Dateline, NBC, the BBC, etc. One of the great things I should tell you about being publisher of The Nation is that I'm constantly being congratulated for other people's work. And the Nation even won a National Magazine Award, and of course it was for Katha's essay. So keep on writing, Katha, and I promise to keep on graciously receiving the congratulations.
Thank you, Victor.
You're welcome. Okay, now, all the way on the other end of this panel is Mark Crispin Miller. Mark Crispin Miller bears the title of Professor of Writing Seminars at Johns Hopkins University, and he is rumored to be in transit to NYU, and he actually is in transit to NYU. So, thank you. This is by way of a premature welcome to our city. He's the author of, among other books, The Culture of TV, and he does a weekly radio commentary on cultural issues. He has written for many journals, appeared widely on television, but his real accomplishment is that he is the inventor he's the inventor of a new art form, the media concentration chart. Now, it is said that imitation is the highest form of flattery, but Mark's media concentration charts in the nation are not imitated. They are ripped out and posted, stolen, and reprinted. Oh yes, in the New Yorker, the one that asks, what's next? They forgot that it already was. There is, you guessed it, a media concentration chart. But don't worry, Mark, it's not your chart. This time they don't even mention your name, as a matter of fact. So, but if I were you, I'd patent it. So. Walter Isaacson, who is to my immediate left over here, who joined us on the night of Time's closing, for which we should thank him, was named managing editor of Time magazine in January. Last. He's the author of a tough book on Henry Kissinger. His presence on our panel suggests that he didn't learn all that much about the need for establishment powers that be to keep a low profile when he wrote his book, The Wise Men. He may or may not be the wisest person on our panel, but entering this den of radical, dissenting, alienated, alternative journalists, he may well be the bravest.
You didn't give me a choice.
Walter is a graduate of Harvard and a Rhodes Scholar, but for all his establishment credentials, he's made it a point when called upon to trek down to the nation and conduct seminars for our interns, who you'll see in the audience tonight. And he has shown an uncommon sensitivity to the importance of the alternative press, so we're glad you're here, Walter. At 28, Farai Chideya, who's to Bill Moyer's left, is too young to have done all the things she appears to have done, not to mention what she's doing. She is an ABC News correspondent and on Good Morning America. She covered the 1996 presidential election for CNN. I'm not going to tell you what she did for MTV or does for Vibe. Her stereotype-shattering book, Don't Believe the Hype, Fighting Cultural Misinformation About African Americans, was in its 8th printing the last time I looked. But that's not all. Farai, who also gives Nation intern seminars, all of you, by the way, are free to apply for a Nation internship, has been named by Newsweek to its Century Club of 100 people to watch as we approach the year 2000. We're delighted to be watching you tonight, Farai. That's sitting to Farai's left is Christopher Hitchens. I first discovered Christopher Hitchens as an elegant byline in the New Statesman magazine, published in London, from London. He started writing for The Nation, and then one day I looked up from my desk, and there was this Oxford accent in a disheveled white suit. And the rest is history, or should I say revisionist history. We actually worked out the first international editors exchange in history. Christopher and one of our editors changed jobs and countries and apartments and places for 3 months, and then fortune smiled on the nation and Christopher defected. And he hasn't left since, basically. He's the author most recently of The Missionary Position, Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice. Christopher operates in 3 worlds: the world of the left, with his column in The Nation, articles in London Review of Books, Dissent, and so forth. The world of high style and TV with his columns in Vanity Fair, and the world of his own making, Hitch's World, I commend it to you. Now, little did I suspect when we invited Bill Moyers to moderate the evening's panel that this most moderate, scholarly, and civilized of TV personalities would prove to be a secret militant. But this afternoon we were going over the ground rules for this evening's conversation, carefully worked out opening statements, rebuttals, questions from the audience, etc. And he gently informed me that having learned from last night's experience, and in the interest of carrying on a real conversation, he was unilaterally, with our okay, suspending our carefully conceived plans. It is Bill Moyers' contention that we asked him to moderate this program because of his experience as a television moderator, and as such, he is going to play by TV rules. And by the way, C-SPAN is here. And while this may be a media and democracy Congress, TV, whose tyrant is the clock, is anything but democratic. Now, since Bill has received, among a host of other TV awards, 30 Emmys, I thought it best to go along. Bill, thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you. I have been curious as to why I was asked to do this. The last time I looked out on a crowd like this, it was from the White House, and you were demonstrating in Lafayette Park. I gave a commencement at a university not far from here a few years ago, and after the ceremonies were over, a young woman who'd just been graduated came up to me and said, "Mr. Moyers, you've been in both government and journalism. That makes everything you say doubly hard to believe." True. And the fact of the matter is, I have been on both sides of all of it. I've been at CBS and at PBS. I've published a large newspaper and written freelance articles, and I'm somewhat confused about my own role in the world of journalism today. And it seems to me that some of the people on this panel are too, or at least they're confusing to me. I mean, Katha Pollitt writes for The Nation and Glamour. And I wonder if when you are writing for the Glamour, you're writing differently from the way you write in the New Yorker, or wondering whether your audience is reading your prose or gazing aggressively at the soft porn ads beside what you write.
Do you want me to answer that?
In a minute. Farai, you have feet in both camps. You're visible in both the independent and the big media, and in both print and broadcasting. Chris, you write for Vanity Fair and The Nation, for Dissent and the New York and the Times Literary Review. Mark, you've written for Mother Jones and the New York Times Book Review. So I'm wondering if you aren't a little confused about your role when you're writing for the big boys or when you're writing for yourself. What about that?
I think that I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated that you brought up those Glamour articles. I told myself I was writing for Glamour as a public service because I was trying to mainstream my feminism and my politics, and I think I did some of that. But what I was not able to mainstream, and Glamour is in some ways a feminist magazine, and in other ways a non-feminist magazine. But what I was not able to do is to have almost any sentence that I wrote appear in the magazine the way I wrote it. And I find that this is a genuine difference between writing, say, for The Nation and writing for the larger world, is that one is continually told that one's sentences are too long, the readers won't understand, this reference is too highfalutin, and I feel that these are essentially collaborative projects with my name on them, but the check is also written in my name, and so that's good. That's the good part. But I think that there's a great deal of, you can't call it censorship, or if you call it censorship, that puts kind of the wrong spin on it, because what it really is stupefaction. It's really just the consistent underrating of the attention span, the intelligence, and the political acumen of the readers. And I think this is very, very characteristic of the women's magazines in particular. You know, they are all written by very sophisticated women like me and Farai, who believe that they are writing for morons, essentially. So they're constantly dumbing themselves down, dumbing the copy down, and it ends up being very advertiser-friendly.
Well, let me ask Farai, do you feel that way? Do you share that dichotomy?
Well, for me, sometimes I feel like for every magazine or for every television show, I have a different voice, and by now I have so many voices going through my head that I should go get it thoroughly examined. But the one thing that I try to do is be consistent in what I'm accomplishing with my work. Of course, bad things happen. Editors say you can't do this story or you can't do it this way. But no matter whether I'm doing something for ABC or for Vibe or in the past for CNN or for an op-ed piece, I try to focus in on what exactly it is I'm trying to transmit, and I also try very hard to at least propose risky stories. And I think one thing that I'm hoping we can do tonight is start at the end of these panels. These panels always end up with a call to action. They always end up with us saying, gee, things are really horrible, and you know, next panel we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And I think that we really need to start now. And for me, there are some very specific things that we need to do as a group, but also individually. And because the question was about how I relate to my work, individually I at least try to propose stories that my editors will probably find either unpalatable or unworkable. So today, you know, we've got Danny Schechter's book out. I brought it in to work at ABC, and he has a little no ABC sign across his complimentary CD, and I brought it in and I said, hey, check this out. And you know, who knows, something may happen. I don't know, but at least I'm trying. And I think that self-censorship is a lot worse than the censorship that's going on. I think there's such a tendency to say, well, they'll never go for that. Well, how are you going to know unless you try?
But the issue, the point of the question was, does writing for a conglomerate, Christopher, change your perception of your role as a journalist than writing for Navasky at The Nation?
The question is whether one can have anything both ways. I mean, for example, in this hall, or at least in this building, Jose Marti came to address the memorial meeting on the death of Karl Marx. It must have been about 109 years ago. And the name Marti is probably known now to people in America, if at all, not as the liberator of Cuba and as the battler against American imperialism, but as the brand name of junk propaganda pumped south at taxpayers' expense by the Clinton administration. So having it both ways is partly being in a position where you can tell a mainstream audience what they don't already know about their mainstream government, which you couldn't do if you were just saying it in, say, The Nation. My own view about this is that it's not for me to say. It will be for the readers to decide whether the degenerate they see and read, sometimes on the television, sometimes on the radio, sometimes on the page and so on, is or is not a person of any principle. I place myself in the safekeeping of such audiences I've been able to attract. I leave the question with them. If I'm asked what is my own still small voice on the factor, it would be this. Peter de Vries, quite a good novelist, now deceased. Maybe some of you used to read Peter de Vries. He was a New Yorker type fictionist. Good man. Pulled off the remarkable trick, actually, of being able to write both tragic novels and comic novels. If you read The Blood of the Lamb, for example, it's very hard to read without weeping. But if you read Mackerel Plaza, even by yourself, it's quite difficult to read without hysterical mirth. Anyway, de Vries was once asked what were his ambitions as a writer. He never, I suppose, was more evaluated than as a minor writer, and he said, well, my ambition as a writer is to have a mass audience large enough for my elite audience to despise. That will do me. That'll do me. If I was there now, I would think this question even less hostile than I do already.
Well, Let me. Let's try it this way then. Some people feel that, you know, that one of the big story of the day is the triumph of radical capitalism. Capitalism untethered by any moral moorings, capitalism that honors no boundaries, capitalism that is its own reason for existing. And I wonder, Walter, since you work in the heart of the capitalist establishment and are a graduate of both Oxford and Harvard, both establishment institutions, could you commission one of these independent journalists to write a critique of radical capitalism for Time magazine?
I've just been trying to talk Katha into writing some stuff for us, so we can. I do think that there's a diversity of voices that you have in the media, and a diversity of media that doesn't create the type of grand repression of voices that people sometimes like to talk about at these panels. In fact, I'll plead guilty on Mark Crispin Miller's chart. He did that chart on media conglomerates, and he had the whole section on Time Warner. He said, we're putting it here in the Nation because you'll never read about it in a Time publication. So when the Turner deal came through, we did have somebody who happened to be one of our business writers do a piece about how thoroughly dumb the deal was and what a mess it was, and we reprinted the chart, noting that the Nation said we'd never reprint the chart, because I just like Victor Navasky and like to give him a little bit of publicity now and then. But also because I think that people are pretty damn smart. They know what they're reading. They know the media they're reading. I happen to think we have a smart enough audience. And you know, there's always this talk about we should despise the notion of a mass audience, and then we move on to we need to make the media more democratic. Well, I think that's a bit contradictory. I think you got to trust the readers, give them all the information, you know, that not hold things back, and you'll get a big audience, and there's nothing wrong with getting a big audience. I know that didn't directly answer your question of whether I'm going to get Katha to write about the downfall of capitalism in the 20th century.
She accepts.
I think there are lots of threats that are happening to capitalism now that range from everything from Microsoft to you know, various ways the economy works, and I hope we cover those well. And I don't know. I'd love to. I like getting feedback when we're missing stories.
What about it, Mark? Is there, you did the chart, is there more or less diversity in journalism today? I gather, I know Walter has been active not only in the print at Time, but in cable, internet, interactive media. He's part of the new media where people say everyone has a computer and can write what they wish. There's no concentration problem at all, is there?
I'd say there's less diversity rather than more. I would also say that it's probably a mistake to confuse a large market with a genuine democratic citizenry. I also think...
I think it's only a mistake if you don't trust the minds of the people who read you.
Right. Well, I don't think it's fair to suggest that people on the left despise the mass audience. That's kind of a loaded way to put it.
I'm sorry, I was just picking up on Christopher's quote, but
right.
yeah.
Now let me say that I did very much appreciate your mentioning the Nation in Time magazine.
And we'll keep doing
I'm always
it.
happy for a plug. And to answer your original question, I very much like to write for Vanity Fair, but Cy Newhouse won't return my call. That's the problem that I'm having with him.
We're all trying to get more work here. That's really why
Well, speak for yourself, baby. I do want to sort of answer your question in a bit more creative way than you might have expected. We're on TV, right? Well, we will be on TV, so it's appropriate to use visual aids. And I certainly take the point that Time was critical of the merger. I think that the people at Time have often bent over backwards to avoid the appearance of doing the bidding of the parent company. Some of the best stuff I've read on Rupert Murdoch, for example, is by Eric Larson in your pages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this may sound irrelevant, but I'd also like to point out that Richard Schickel, well, no, before I get into that, I just want to show you all something that I think sums the problem up, maybe in a nutshell, a kind of visual nutshell, if you allow me to mix my metaphors. You know, this is the Media and Democracy Congress. We tend to talk primarily here about corporate censorship of the news, the exclusion of minorities and dissident voices, and the promotion of dissemination of certain kinds of stereotypes. But I think probably it might be more appropriate to ask ourselves, what is the quality of life in a culture dominated by the corporate media? What is it like, you know? What is it like to live here? You all remember the Gulf War. I'm sure most of the people in here shared my panicky, nauseated feeling at being surrounded by all this hoopla that seemed to make any kind of dissent impossible, that made peace organizations, peace movements sort of beside the point because they came along too late. Their voices sounded piping and feeble against that roar of applause. It's a little bit like that when Lady Diana died so tragically. There's just this roar, you know? Well, we're talking about the promotion of the feeling of a tempest, of a maelstrom. Now, I use that metaphor deliberately. I'm going to take my microphone, TV style, and I'm going to show. Is that better? No? I'm not terribly good at this.
That's a fail.
Okay. I went to the trouble to blow these things up. Keep the microphone on, okay? You're not doing this to me, are you, Walter? Here is a poster for the film Twister, a Warner Brothers production. And, you know, it's not irrelevant to point out that it really stinks as a movie.
Now, wait a minute, Mark. I mean, this is a direct attack on my integrity.
Well,
And I want to, let me answer it, okay?
okay.
We put movies on the cover. We put movies on the cover about twice a year at time. And I've been pretty careful and bent over backwards ever since there was a merger, because I knew that people like you would love to do stuff like this. It makes you feel good. I finally had to commission somebody to look at it, because people keep writing about, oh, they're going to put Warner Brothers stuff on the cover. After Newsweek had done 14 covers involving things of Warner Brothers, and we had done one, and the one we had done at that point was an attack on violence in music when the music rap stuff was going on, and it was a tough piece. I finally said, okay, I'm going to quit bending over backwards, never to put anything that might have come out or been distributed, in this case, by Warner Brothers. Now, I can give you 14 other things that we've put on. Most recently, whatever, that's 7 Years in Tibet, which I can't remember who put it out, but it was, if you're saying that I've lost my integrity, I'm just going to put Warner Brothers stuff on the cover, I hope you have better proof than one little visual.
Walter, first of all, I'm not saying that about you.
Then what are you saying?
I'm actually suggesting that this is an inappropriate subject for a cover story in a major news weekly. That's what.
All right, what is it? Let me ask you, what is that cover about of Time magazine?
Well, the cover is about tornadoes.
Right.
Right. Well,
Even rules.
you don't mean to. Now, see, I'm not saying that you put this on the cover to push the film, because
it was tied to the movie, just like when we do various covers, be it on dinosaurs, when the movie about dinosaurs comes out. It may be quite nice to write for magazines, you know, and never get to write for Cy Newhouse because you're too pure ever to write about dinosaurs when a dinosaur movie comes out, or hurricanes when a hurricane movie comes out. But we do that because our readers want it, and our readers like it, and it's a very informative way to talk about anything from twisters to dinosaurs. We do it about twice a year, and I don't think I have to make apologies for it.
How close together are those two articles published?
Which one?
How close together?
Two. Which two? We do covers on movies when those movies come out. We did 7 Years in Tibet a few weeks ago when it came out. We did a cover story about tornadoes when that came out. We did a cover story on dinosaurs when the Spielberg movie came out. I don't like doing pure entertainment covers. What I like to do is every now and then there's a subject that comes...
Well,
yeah, they're tie-ins. Because they are a way when a particular topic, whether it be Tibet or dinosaurs or whatever, happens to be on people's minds. We live in a culture that when a big movie comes out, people start talking about that topic. I'm not particularly interested in doing stories on movies. So I say, let's pick what's behind the movie. I think another movie story we did when the movie came out was on First Wives Club, which dealt with, you know, the sociology of that. We don't do the stories about the entertainment.
what do some of the rest of you think about this dialogue? Christopher?
I think Walter should have protested earlier on when Victor said that his book on Kissinger was very critical, whereas in fact it was, as we both know, Walter, very lenient. That's when you should have sprang up in your own defense. You're not here tonight. You're not here to defend your corporation, and I think it's very decent of you to do so. But I don't think Mark was trying to put you on that spot. Look, all of you here are complete suckers. You could be at home now watching me on Larry King, which was recorded on Wednesday in Los Angeles, and you can see, instead of watching me now prosing on, you could be watching me debating with Frederick Forsyth about whether Britain should still have a monarchy. A question about which, as you know, public opinion has been polled and found to be insatiable. One day, Larry King, one day, it will come. There's no reason it doesn't come yet. One day, Larry King will do a program about should Alan Greenspan be in charge of the Federal Reserve. It will happen. One day, opinion polls will call you up at home in your kitchen and ask, is the Federal Reserve's money supply policy too tight, in your opinion? There's no reason that they don't do that now, is there? It's as relevant to you as... In the meantime, I'm sorry, you'll just have to be told and believe that this happens to you this way because of public demand.
Why did you go on the show?
And if you didn't demand this, it's just your fault that you're getting it, okay? Because a great deal, I must say a great deal of thought has gone into mixing a populist culture with an elitist system. And for the elite to decide what the people want, and for the people to appear to echo what the elite decide should be the discussion, has been very well studied and very carefully polled and very well thought out. Focus groups that you don't even know about have been involved in this. And that populism and elitism are in such an alliance is the whole purpose now of mass media, and it's quite unfair, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, it's quite unfair to blame Walter Isaacson for that fact.
You are an independent journalist. Christopher, you're an independent journalist. It took you an hour or maybe 2 hours to go on Larry King to talk about the House of Windsor. Why did you spend your time that way?
Well, I won't refuse a challenge from Frederick Forsyth, who is becoming the sort of the Ian Fleming of the extreme right on cable TV. And I won't miss a chance to go on Larry King, because if you say no, you see, if like me you spend a certain amount of time saying, well, the main purpose of mass cult and most of mid-cult is to create the impression of a consensus whereby we are the subject and the object, and thus the consensus exists whereby we are in mourning for Princess Diana, we are in mourning for Mother Teresa. Not the people mourning, they're not covered as the mourners. We are all told that we are part of this we. So a consensus 100 miles wide and a millimeter deep is created. If you have spent any time prosing on saying that's bogus, that's phony, that's lying, why, when you're rung up and asked your political opinions, are you asked, are you a moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat? Or a right-wing Republican or an extreme liberal Democrat? Why can you never actually say your political opinions? Why is there no space for them when you're rung up in your kitchen? If, as I say, you have the chance to say this, when the network calls and says, okay, you're on, it's your turn, unfortunately it has to be about Princess Diana, but we are asking you on, you have to say yes. Otherwise they'll say you said no. They'll say we asked him, he didn't come.
Would you have gone on?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question because I get called a lot to be on television, but I only get called on certain subjects. Like the last time, okay, Oprah's best friend Gail now has her own show. So I get called to, Foxy, Vivica Fox, someone, wonderful actress no doubt, is going to give remakes to some women that would like to be more sexy, but they're shy. And could I, as a feminist, come help out? I was so bewildered. I said, I don't think so. I said, covenant marriage, I was very much in demand around covenant marriage, and I went on Nightline to discuss covenant marriage with Ralph Reed. And I had a bit of luck because Ralph Reed got lost trying to find his way to the studio in Atlanta, so he was maybe not as ferocious as I was thinking he would be. But anyway, I was astounded. I felt it was the same as with Christopher. I felt, no, I have to do this. I've written about this. I have to weigh in. And I have a list of people that I recommend when I'm just feeling too nauseated to do it myself, so that I feel, the point of view gets out. That's what's important to me. Not that it be me who says it, but Stephanie Kuntz could say it. There are lots of good people around this particular issue. Anyway, I did go on, and I was astounded because there's Cokie Roberts, and Cokie says, they have a little montage, the premise of which is there's too much divorce, and this too much divorce is the reason we have all kinds of social problems, and everyone agrees that the government should do something about this problem which causes these other problems. The only question is whether having right-wing fundamentalists write the laws of the state of Louisiana is a good idea. So set up that way, I had to spend a lot of time saying, well, actually, Cokie, I don't agree that there's too much divorce. I mean, what are we talking about here? Maybe there's too much marriage. At least I hope I said. Maybe I didn't say that. I hope I said that. And I had to talk about, and also I think this connection of divorce and these social problems you discuss is also a bogus construct. I don't accept this. By that time, oh, thanks a lot, Catherine, now let's have Ralph talk, So I think it is almost impossible to say anything complicated or true on television. Nonetheless, I feel one has to try to do it, because if you don't do it, or someone like you, then someone even worse will do it instead.
Do you think that is the result of concentration and conglomeration?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and here I would have to say not entirely. I think it is partly a facet of the media itself. Pierre Bourdieu, who's a very interesting left-wing French sociologist, sort of the dean of sociology now in France, he's written a book called On Television, a little pamphlet, in which he says, and he's talking about scholars more than sort of people like us, except for Mark, who is a scholar. He's not talking about journalists. But he says, you can't say anything true or complicated on TV. They get you on there to provide entertainment, and you shouldn't do it. Oh, uproar. All these left-wing, pseudo-left-wing French intellectuals like Alain Finkielkraut, all these people, Bernard-Henri Lévy, they were furious because he was saying, you're not serious. You are trying to be movie stars. You have lost contact with saying things that are careful and accurate and true, and you're just worrying about your hairstyles now. But Pierre Bourdieu was right. And that book, I'm happy to say, sold 100,000 copies, but that was in France.
I think this is fascinating. You're saying that the crunch that journalists feel in going on television in particular is a consequence of a facet of the medium, the nature of the medium. Do you think that's true? You work for one of the big media companies, ABC. Are you called upon to do what you don't want to do as a journalist, to crunch the facts, to go for entertainment instead of information? You agree with her?
Well, I think in general, yes. I personally, in my new job at ABC, have not yet been asked to, but I think realistically speaking, that's because I'm too far down on the totem pole yet, and there's always more flexibility at the bottom. I think all of us who exist in media, including the alternative media, will eventually be asked to do things that we don't want to do. The first step is to unpack the ego and say, am I mad because I just want to do what I want, or am I mad because this is a good story and I want to make sure it gets done right? And I just wanted to comment on this a little bit. Now, personally, I think that, I'm used to working within the mainstream media. I've worked for Newsweek, I've written for Walter at Time, I've worked at MTV, I've worked at ABC. I guess I'm the most alternative of the mainstream media girls, or the most mainstream of the alternative media girls. And I think that this is a reality of media, that pegs are used to sell stories. I just did a story for ABC where I went to a Native American reservation. And we were thinking about Columbus Day as the peg, and it may not run till Thanksgiving. But you know what? No one else has ever visited this reservation from a major TV station. And I'm just glad it's going to get on. And I'm going to make sure it gets on. And I think there's a degree to which, while we try to change the system, and again, I'm hoping we can move into this realm of changing things, that it's more important to get good stories out there than it is to necessarily worry about the peg system. I mean, if things never get on, that's much more of a tragedy. For me, on TV, I mean, I have a fairly wide range, yet in some ways a specific type of story I like to do. I mean, I like to do politics from the standpoint of what real people think as opposed to what other pundits think, which is kind of weird since I was a pundit. I like to cover race relations from the standpoint of where we're realistically headed, as opposed to the BS rhetoric about America's impending decline because we were becoming increasingly non-white. And I have been allowed to say these things, and I'm glad I have. But it's been, at certain points, it's been difficult, but I find that the more that I do it, the more that I'm able to do it. And so I think there's a certain point of resistance that you push against, and then after that, in some ways, it gets easier.
Stay with this for a moment. What is the news not being covered because of concentration? The news of democracy not being covered because of concentration.
Can
I was going to ask Walter. You start. No, you go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to put in that one place where you can get a lot of information on things that aren't covered is in the mainstream media, is on various lists on the internet, and I'm on a couple of them. Autopsy, for example, which carries a lot of stories about what's going on with labor around the world, labor resistance. It's amazing! You would never know if you just read the big American publications. You would never know that the world is in an uproar. In fact, you wouldn't even know that a couple of weeks ago, longshoremen in Oakland, in sympathy with the Liverpool dock strikers, who you probably also don't know about, refused to let a great big ship land and take out its cargo. I mean, that's amazing.
News of the working class.
Working class news, forget it. How many labor reporters are there? You know, the New York Times has one. They used to have a whole bunch. You know, he's a great man, but he has to get the stories in by sort of making fun of the, you know, of the sort of left-wing end of the labor movement. I think that labor news is very ill-covered. I think the women's movement is very ill-covered. We saw that with the Promise Keepers. I think there is a lot going on at the grassroots level that you just never hear about, and that produces this effect that nothing is going on.
What about that, Walter? Do you have a list of news?
Well, I agree with Katha totally, which is that there's a lot that doesn't get covered well in the mainstream media. And the great thing that's happening now, as she said, is I believe there's a lot more outlets, a lot more places you can go for news. Not only the internet and the various webzines there. I mean, I read about 20 webzines a week that have exposed me to all sorts of types of stories that I would not normally see.
But why?
Secondly, talk radio, the various proliferation of, some of it good, some of it bad. I mean, there's a lot of wacky ideas that people say, hey, you know what the mainstream press doesn't tell you is that the black helicopter's about to land and take away your rights. But
there was a survey recently which said that 80% of the talk show hosts in this country identify themselves as conservative. Do you think you're going to get labor news, working news there?
I think you're going to find across this country, on the internet, on radio, about the widest diversity of voices. And you're right, most talk radio shows are pretty wild, in my opinion.
Why?
All right, let us talk about the Cassini rocket. Yeah, let us. I love people like that who always say that. We did. Oh, wait, let me answer. I think the Cassini rocket launch is very important. That's why we did a big story on it in Time magazine. I sometimes get on these panels, people say, why don't you cover these things? I feel like I should bring copies of the magazine and say, people should know about that Cassini rocket launch. And yeah, we covered it. But there's some rocket launches and some nuclear things we don't cover. And that's why I do think it's good to have a diversity of voices in this country.
You can say, look, you can say that some things might not be covered, given a certain political bias, but John Kasich, for example, is the only person in Congress who's ever suggested abolishing corporate welfare, the MX, or the stealth program. What you can say, conservatives may or may not do certain things, but you can say one thing for absolute certain: if the liberals are in charge, none of these things will be allowed to come up. Okay? That is the absolute certainty of the matter. The complacency and mean-spiritedness and solidarity in the face of their own power, of the liberal consensus, is the reason why we're in the cart politically at the moment. If that lot had stayed the masters of Congress, you can be absolutely certain everything, including that shuttle, sir, would have gone straight through on the nod. It's only the rise of the right that's allowed this stuff to be discussed at all. And anyone who doesn't realize that hasn't caught up, hasn't been paying attention. That said, the consensus is still the strongest thing. Cokie Roberts last weekend, I shouldn't have been surprised, I probably really shouldn't have been, but when she said to Sam Donaldson about the Promise Keepers, well, Sam, they say they've come to Washington with no politics and no agenda and no beliefs, just to pray and be better guys. And I say, why don't we take that just at face value? I thought, well, now I know everything I suspected about her is true, and so on and so on. But about what else could a person in her position have said that and still been a journalist? That is the definition of what it is not to be a journalist, to say, let's take it at face value.
Mark, and then
Okay, I just want to address these issues. First of all, there isn't all that much diversity out there in the media. This is a kind of, well, this may be the most important myth of the era of the information superhighway. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that's true, but the internet is daily becoming more and more commercialized. And the companies that collaborated on the telecommunications bill are extremely eager to colonize that territory and make sure that there's less diversity thereon. But not everybody's online. The fact is that when it comes to the most important kind of diversity, which is ideological diversity, there's almost none anywhere in the mainstream media, it seems to me, where you have shouting matches on TV in which the left is represented by someone like Geraldine Ferraro or Bob Beckel or Michael Kinsley. You know, the joke that Fair has made so famous, I'm not a leftist, but I play one on TV. There really is no left. This has to do with Kathy's point about labor reporting, and you don't have to go as far afield as Liverpool to look at the way they've covered is the apt word, I'm afraid, the newspaper strike in Detroit. The fact is that there is no real ideological diversity in the mainstream media. A few liberals are allowed to sound off from time to time. I just want to quote Dr. Goebbels for a moment, because he's always good for a little insight into the way things have gone. I know that sounds inflammatory.
No, not particularly.
Not particularly. Well, you're the authority on that, Christopher. I recommend, well, there's a biography of Dr. Goebbels that came out a couple of years ago. He says about the purpose of Nazi propaganda.
Banned biography.
Not David Irving's. We can argue about that some other time. This is a good biography. He says at one point that one of the purposes of Nazi propaganda is to present an ostensible diversity behind which lies an actual uniformity. Okay? Now, that's not unlike what we have now. I mean, one of the standard comebacks people will lay on you when you offer media critique is, well, you know, look at all the magazines on the newsstand, look at all the cable channels you have. There is a kind of dazzling multiplicity of seemingly different offerings, you know, and yet when it comes to true ideological diversity and real debate, in fact, there's really nothing on. And I would say, as far as the right wing is concerned, because Bill, you mentioned the fact that the majority of radio hosts are consider themselves conservative, so to speak. I would say that this is echoing something Christopher said a moment ago, that much of that right-wing sentiment is in fact crypto-populist sentiment. When it comes to the media, the vast majority of the American people are distrustful, highly skeptical, to the point of paranoia. It's true. They do talk about the black helicopters. That's true. But what do you expect people to think? When the government and the mainstream media are constantly lying, most people will tend to believe any kind of lunatic theory that comes along that can be used handily to explain what's happening.
Did you say the mainstream media are lying?
I would say that the mainstream media constantly carry official lies, yes. It's a kind of echo chamber. Well, I mean, look at the Gulf War. I used that as one example. It wasn't peculiar to the era of Vietnam. It does happen all the time. The media is used as a kind of an official echo chamber, you know. But I would just conclude by saying this, because this is the Media and Democracy Congress, and most of the people in here are progressives. The left has really dropped the ball so far when it comes to connecting with the mainstream on vis-a-vis the media. Only the right wing has exploited this widespread distrust and fear and economic insecurity, and you know what the main theory of media ownership is on the right. Go out to the internet and see what the theory is. You know the theory, speaking of Dr. Goebbels, it's that the media is a Jewish conspiracy. Well, they should be told that it's a capitalist conspiracy, and it's not a conspiracy. It's business as usual.
Barack?
Well, I wanted to follow up on what Mark said and what Christopher said in terms of the ultimate sin for a journalist is taking things at face value. And because I'm interested, I hope that we do get to talk about solutions because it's crucial. Here's a couple of possible solutions. The first one on the face value issue is to demand, I think that we should demand equal follow-up. So if a story is particularly bad, particularly lacking, particularly, disreputable, we should demand that the follow-up be as large as the original story. Now, Charles Murray, when he wrote The Bell Curve, went around saying that he would be shut out of mainstream media. And he said this as he appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. And he appeared on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. Now, this article is one that appeared on the New York Times editorial page, and it says, "The Bell Curve revisited by scholars, its noxious claims refuted 3 years late." And if you weighed the paper ounce for ounce, I would wager that this is about 1/100th of the stuff that was printed when his book came out. And it talks about the ways in which his statistical analyses were completely and utterly baseless. I think that we need to demand adequate follow-up, equal follow-up, when stories go completely unchecked. A couple of other possible solutions, I'm just going to throw these out and we can hopefully follow up on them later. Do we, people who care about a progressive media, which is inclusive of the points of views that don't exist right now, want to create new networks? Is the problem that the networks that exist, or is the problem that the left doesn't have a network? Are there ways to disseminate information within ourselves and reach into the mainstream populace? Do we want to build pundits or to build editorial networks? Even though I've been a pundit, being a pundit means you get up, you say your piece, you leave. You don't set the tone for the cover story. You don't set the tone for the first story that appears on the nightly news. So that is another question. Do we need to influence more of the ranks? Do we want to do media education for younger people? Because there's this huge drop-off of people who are in their 20s, people who are in high school who just don't watch the news. They know that it's flawed and they don't care. But you know what? If you don't watch it, you can't critique it. You can't say, if there's war crimes going on somewhere, do you want to say, well, gee, I'm sure they're terrible. I really don't want to find out what's going on. Or do you want to find out what's wrong so that you have some hopes of fixing it? So do we want to find ways to create critical media consumers in the next generation? And these are all things I think we need to think about and move forward on.
Let me just give you Let me just give you a brief roadmap of the evening, because you say we should talk about solutions, and we will. But if we had taken opening statements, we've been going about 30 minutes, we'd only now have gotten to this discussion. So we decided, and the panelists agreed, to drop the opening statements. I'd like to continue this general discussion on concentration and its impact for a few more minutes, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll come back to the panel for a final round. We still have another hour to go, because we did get started late, and you were guaranteed for the price of admission at least a 2-hour show. Let me try it this way. A couple of years ago, my former editorial associate, Andrea Tucker, and the journalist, her friend Dan Bischoff, who was at one time a political editor of the Village Voice, wrote an article for the Media Studies Journal in which they noted this global expansion of journalism, dozens of countries opening the ranks of the world's democracies and bringing new opportunities for commercial media. The market for news and information, they said, is expanding almost exponentially. But this commodification of information, they wrote, has not led to more journalism about public affairs, but to more entertainment. Internationally, journalism, and I'm quoting, is not so much the fourth estate of government as it is a division of the entertainment industry, and a decidedly minor division at that, somewhere between Entertainment Tonight and the mailroom at MCA. Fledgling global media outfits like Rupert Murdoch's Star TV now beam Oprah Winfrey, reruns of classic 50 sitcoms, and current Fox staples like The Simpsons into fancy dockas on the Black Sea and herdsmen's yurts on the Mongolian plain alike, bringing the ideology of consumption with all of its ironies and tunnel vision to people who have only recently left behind a lead-color socialism. Their conclusion was that the result of freedom and capitalism were the commodification of news and information into entertainment to please people and not to engage people. Walter, what do you think about that?
I do think we've gotten too much into entertainment in the news business. And I know we have a Time magazine, and I'm going to try to steer it away a bit. On the other hand, I think to say that, as this seems to imply, that by giving people what we want, we talk down to them or just try to be entertaining, I don't really feel that's true. I think that people actually want some good information, that if you pander to them with pure entertainment stuff, and that's why, frankly, I am a little bit defensive about covers like that, not just the Warner connection or whatever, but our movie covers and stuff. I think we probably do a little bit too much entertainment coverage, and I'd like to recede from it a bit.
Why do we do it?
I mean, I think ever since, our magazine is a general interest magazine. For 75 years, it's done 2 or 3 covers on movies and 1 or 2 on music and 5 or 6 on science and 1 or 2 on religion every year. I think we probably thought that if we do a whole lot of entertainment on the cover, we'll sell better. But I think in the end, you'll lose your credibility by trying to be too much of an entertainment medium.
Well, it's not that. You see, I still feel Walter's been slightly unfairly ambushed by,
Thank you, Chris.
Because, if I'd come to a Time magazine event to defend the alternative press and a fellow was set up like that, I would feel pissed off, I've got to say. But it's not what you think, it's how you think that matters. Now, people are perfectly entitled, it seems to me, to go to a focus group and say what kind of sitcom they would like to see. They should be made to see it once they've said what they want to see. But the entertainment industry is within its rights. What we cannot expect, but what we are getting, sinisterly, I think, imported, is the idea, well, shouldn't people have some say in what news they are given? Now, news by definition is what you don't know already, and you might not even like when you get. When the entertainment division control starts to move into that, then the alarm should go off. Now, there is a reason, and it's not just because of the merger of elitism and populism, which I think is the main merger to worry about, because that's a cultural merger that people can do something about instead of just flailing on about horizontal and vertical capitalist integration. There's something they can do with their own minds. They can resist it, for one thing. The merger of elitism and populism, of course that's why you will be rung up and asked, do you think taxpayers' money should be spent on the NEA or not? And you will never be rung up and asked, should it be spent on Radio Marti, the stuff that defames the man who I mentioned earlier spoke so brilliantly in this hall a century or so ago. That's because of interest, same as the Detroit newspaper strike. Class interest will determine a lot of things, but it won't determine everything. Some things can actually be husbanded by good taste. Now, there is also something called journalism, and it's practiced by journalists. The journalists who were pulled out of Baghdad by their networks before the war began didn't have to leave if they didn't want to, okay? Their networks said, come home, they came home. It was a disgrace to the profession, to individuals, and to the practice of journalism, that they all did what they were told, and their networks did what they were asked to do by the Defense Department, okay? That's something that shames every member of the profession. They can't blame it on conglomeration. Only Peter Arnett refused. Now, a number of people, including some good friends of mine, decided to stay in Sarajevo. They said, we don't care whether people want to read about Bosnia or not. We don't care what your focus groups have told you about Bosnia or not. We think it's important. We're going on strike. We remember why we joined the profession. We'll stick to it. People are, in other words, we mustn't act as if we are resistlessly in the power of some mechanism. We are not. And I think it's very important that the conglomeration not be made the excuse for the surrender of all aspects of courage and taste.
I agree with you completely about journalism. I would, however, suggest that it isn't really necessarily defensible for all of the culture industries to be guided alike by market considerations. In other words, consulting people about what they want to see.
Say what?
Beforehand. I mean, maybe it will lead to hilariously funny and groundbreaking sitcoms. I sort of doubt it. In the current TV season, there are, I think, 65 sitcoms, and you may have a hard time mustering up a feeble chuckle from any one of them.
If you'll excuse me, I was just saying that was what shouldn't be allowed to be the standard for everything.
Well, I thought
You're going to say this again?
Distinction between
What shouldn't be allowed, that implies somebody needs to make sure it doesn't happen. Who would do that?
Well, I don't know, as long as it's not suggested that I said so. I mean, I do think individuals, after all, certain things have to be written by people, can't be still yet written by machines and so on.
Well,
who will decide, I don't know. But
it's not a question so much of who will decide, it's a question of whether or not enormous, heavily indebted parent companies should be able to exert so much pressure on so many culture industries. We're talking about the movies, TV, radio, music, the pressure on them to turn an immediate huge profit right away from the largest possible audience has brought us to a point of aesthetic enervation. And the fact is, the stuff's not that popular. Hollywood's not doing well. The music business is not doing terribly well. Certainly, God knows, the book publishing industry.
But they're doing better than the nation.
Sorry?
They're doing better than the nation.
Hey, wait a minute.
Hey,
Wait a minute.
Katha?
We have 15,000 more subscribers than the New Republic. And nobody would say that the New Republic is irrelevant. So let's not hear that about the nation.
I meant financially.
Oh, financially, well. You'll have to talk to Victor about that. But, you know, I'd like to just throw a little spanner into the works because, you know, I agree about, you know, conglomeratization, it's bad, entertainment, it's bad, but the fact is, if you roll the scroll of time back, it wasn't so great before. There's an illusion here, which is the illusion that if we could just get, you know, like say, instead of Time magazine being run by the whatever big corporation owns it at the moment, it was still being run by Henry Luce. Well, when it was run by Henry Luce, we also had a lot of problems with it. It also was full of government propaganda. It was used as a back channel for all kinds of things. It upheld a certain kind of stodgy notions of, excuse me?
It was a pro-fascist.
Well, yeah, there was that, but yeah, that. I mean, it was awful. It was just awful. And so, and I think if you know if you go back, if you look back, it's very interesting. If you look back, say any murder trial, any famous murder trial from like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever, the coverage of it is always unfactual. The coverage of it is always dictated by the passions of the moment, or whatever the ideas of race or gender or a class or, stuff like that. It's never accurate. Historians always say, oh, well, that was a lot of lies. That was the news then, and that's still the case now. So I think there are problems with the mass media that don't have to do with its ownership and don't even have to do with its advertising, although that's, of course, very important too. We haven't even gotten into that. But that have to do with the social function that the mass media performs in a mass society, which is some weird combination, in my view, to overstate everything and insult everybody, is some weird combination of pandering to people's sadomasochism and their prejudices and enforcing the government's ideas of the moment. And that doesn't have to do with who owns it. It has to do with what it's for.
Absolutely.
I was compelled to jump in to agree with the part about this golden age of wonderful media owned by, statesmen like and stateswomen, who did wonderful things. Having been in a magazine that's owned by a corporation, I know that I can argue as much about all the various, pressures in a corporate environment, but I also know that you can look at various single owners of magazines, be it, I have two friends, Mike Kelly, who just got fired at the New Republic for his political views, and Pete, who got, fired at the Daily News. You can be under the arm of a whimsical owner, be it Henry Luce or any of the others today, and there's some problems in getting truth out. And there are certain insulations, I would argue, and I would never be successful arguing in this room because I'd be shouted down and everything else. But trust me, I think there's some certain insulations you get when you're in a company that knows if it starts messing around with whatever stories you want to write, and knows, frankly, that you're going to bend over backwards to gig Ted Turner and probably pan every Batman movie that comes out just because your critics really want to pan Batman movies because they know that they'll, show off how independent they are. I know I'm never going to get a call. I've never gotten a call from, that. I know there are pressures, and somebody, we can all argue about all the pressures that happen. But I also think there are pressures in the other environment, in the age of Henry Luce and in the age of certain media owners today. The other small point I want to make is I sort of object to the word pandering, which is an easy one to throw around, but it's hard to be for democracy and against pandering intellectually.
No, I don't think that's
I'll make the argument, but I'll let you refute it before I make it. Go ahead.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that we all have lots of capacities in us, and I think that a writer or a magazine can play it high or low. For example, take the coverage of the O.J. trial. Now, a lot of that really was pandering. It was pandering to just horrible, base and vicious capacities that many of us have in it, for wanting to see those horrible photos of slashed dead bodies. Yuck, horrors. I'm no Freudian, but you've got to believe that there's more than just, we're not just sentences written on a page. We also have deep capacities to be shocked and titillated by all kinds of things. And media can evoke that, or it can say, let's just put that on one side. And I think that it's not just the Globe and the National Enquirer that pander. Look at the John Benet Ramsey case, for heaven's sakes, really. This is not some major news story. This is all there because there is something sexual and titillating about the murder of this child.
Do you think people want to read about it?
Yes, they do. And certainly at my grocery store, we're all reading about it.
And do you think that then we shouldn't, if you believe somewhat in the democratization and you believe people want to read about that, I actually haven't covered John Benet very much because I don't find it all that interesting, but you believe there's something wrong with covering it even though people might want it?
No, I don't believe there's something wrong in covering it as a news story. I think there's something wrong in the endless printing of yet another photograph of this hypersexualized little 5-year-old.
So it's...
This, if you'll excuse me, if you'll pardon me, that is, in a way, unlike what you were saying before, Cather, and indeed Walter, that's self-evident. I'm trying keep the focus where you had it for a second, on the writer and the reader. When I became a journalist, I did not imagine I was joining a business that was run by a collective, okay, or owned by one either, or read by one as it happens. I didn't think any of that. If any of you did, you were sapped too, okay? Now, and I also know there will be pressure sometimes from special interests to have something covered either at all or their way, and there'll also be pressure from nowhere in particular to cover a story that it's understood that everybody wants. Well, okay, suppose you admit that. Let's say, okay, it is true, people want to read about this, say the Ramsey case, or they must read about should we abolish funding for the arts. That doesn't mean you have to write about it in the way that is dictated to you. You don't have to say, we are all passionately concerned about our John Binet, for example. That's not mandated. You have a cortex of your own. The cliches are not buried in your machine whereby if your fingers touch the keyboard, they spring through the fingertips into your brain and back onto the paper, okay? You still have to do it. The same with Princess Diana or the Ghoul of Calcutta or any of these things. Who is the we? Who's the we, and why should we assume there is such a... And the same with the... here's an easy reform. Here's an easy reform. The New York Times should drop tomorrow, by public demand, the thing on the front page that says all the news that's fit to print. It should just stop doing that. It should be ridiculed until it does, and its Washington reporters should once, just for an experiment, use the word partisan as if it was not a pejorative, and the word bipartisan as if it was not an automatic compliment, okay? It's in the language. It's in the language. They say, nasty outbreak of partisanship today, but soon bipartisanship regained its throne, so on. Have you ever seen those two words used any other way? Yeah. Does the New York Times ordinarily tell you, my God, if it goes on this way, we'll be a two-party state instead of a one-party state? Normally it would indignantly deny that the United States was a one-party state. In its language, it affirms the contrary. Look to the language. Look to yourself as readers. When did you last protest about that? When did the corrections box last make that correction? When did anyone else ask it to? When did you last embarrass or try to embarrass a New York Times reporter for lying in the way that he and she thinks and speaks and writes? That's where the enemy is, and it's culturally faceable.
You use the word writer. What do you think your role is as a writer, as an independent journalist?
To say that the truth never lies, but when it does lie, it lies somewhere in between.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Let me come at this a different way.
That's to be independent.
The Pew Research Center for the People in the Press issued an intriguing report this week that I brought with me. It reported that, and this is in capital letters, American opinion leaders today see the world as a better place where U.S. influence is enhanced and there are fewer worries about the world. Now, among the American opinion leaders were foreign affairs and security experts, scholars, scientists, religious leaders, governors and mayors, corporate executives, congressional staff, and journalists. Those were listed by the Pew Research Center. And these opinion leaders are much more confident than they were 4 years ago about the state of things and America's place in the world. But in the same poll, among the general public, it's a different story. The majority of ordinary Americans remain, according to the survey, dissatisfied with world conditions and sees no change in America's influence. Question: does this dichotomy mean that opinion leaders, including journalists, are better informed, or does it mean that ordinary people know something the influentials don't?
Well, it's a couple of different things at once. I mean, on the one hand, opinion leaders are better off. Opinion leaders earn more money. Opinion leaders have better channels to get the things that they want. So of course they're going to feel better about the world. They're not leaders. Well, yeah, they're eliters. So I think that that's part of it. And I think that the other part of it is that we in the media, and I am definitely including myself in this, even though I try to fight against it as hard as possible, we tend to make certain situations seem hopeless and unsolvable, especially, I mean, things like urban issues. Schools are bad, schools are bad, schools are bad, schools are bad, schools are bad. Every single headline about schools in an urban area is schools are bad. And what about the things that are done right? Certainly there's a lot to be done, but there's sort of two different problems with the way issues like that are covered. One is that they're covered completely fatalistic. Not only the schools are bad, but the kids are bad. They're trash, we should discard them. There's that sort of permeating attitude about too much of the coverage. Secondly, we don't tell the truth about the things that are making the things that are bad. I mean, sometimes it's because there has been people refusing to pay taxes because there's been white flight from the school system. Sometimes it's because there's corrupt leadership within the city. I mean, we sort of put out these images of this hopeless situation without people giving people the tools to understand why things have gone wrong or to change them. And I think that the pessimism stems from us failing in our role as journalists, not only to report when things are bad, but to give people tools to cope and to change.
I think that's an important point. I mean, I was one of those people who didn't answer the damn Pew Center every time they called me. They kept trying to get me to do the survey. I said, no way. But, journalists and, opinion marketing mucks are all going to say, oh, I'm optimistic. I think the real problem is journalists are often too cynical, too negative, and, sort of holier than thou. Lazy, whatever. And I do think, you talk about schools, I mean, that is an undercovered issue in our society as well. And, we're trying to put together a special issue on schools and schools that work and schools that fail and why. But it takes a whole lot of reporting, and it takes a sense of, we got to get away from some of the entertainment covers and try to do special issues on education where we visit a whole lot of schools and do some serious reporting.
Can I just jump in and, you said, yeah, I know. They passed me a note saying this one's busted. Although I don't, it was a lie. See, can't trust anybody. You made two very different points, and I think your first point bears re-emphasis that there is a tremendous difference between the masses and the chattering classes, and it has to do with class interest. The people who are, pessimistic are the ones who aren't doing terribly well in a system that's increasingly bifurcated between the haves and the have-nots. It's really that, it would seem to me to be that simple. And what's needed is not so much tools to cope, unless by that you mean, as I assume you do actually, real information.
Right.
Knowledge that pertains to people's actual material interests. I think it's a mistake to regard pandering as inherently democratic. I mean, sure, everybody's always been interested, as you suggest, Katha, everybody has always been interested in the lurid. That's nothing new. It's been the case forever. Most of the stuff that was printed in the late 15th century after the invention of the printing press had to do with things like three-headed fish and rainstorms of clams and things like that. I mean, that's just with us all the time. But the fact is that we oughtn't to have most of the stuff that passes for coverage, nor should we have the primary stuff that passes for coverage be the kind of stuff that appeals to that appetite. I mean, people should know stuff about how much their employers are making. They should know stuff about the labor movement. They should know stuff about health care. They should know stuff about foreign policy that's accurate. Those are tools to cope.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience as they were handed to me up here. I'd like a brief answer because some of them are directed to individual panelists. Walter, why doesn't Time magazine take the policy position that it will not put any Time Warner film on its cover to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest?
For the first 3 years after the merger, I basically avoided putting any Time Warner or Warner Brothers film on, frankly, because I thought, people would attack you for conflict of interest. At a certain point, after I printed the chart saying, hey, here we are, we're part of a corporation, and after I looked at, various, other publications and they started doing it, I figured as long as I said up front, whenever we mentioned in a prominent way something that was done by some distant, some other cousin in the corporation, hey, this was done by Warner Brothers. If you want to throw the whole thing away right now, go ahead and do it. It's basically because I trust the readers are smart enough to say, okay, they did it. You know, maybe it's a deep, dark conspiracy they have, but maybe, you know, at least they were honest with me.
Farai, do you think you could cover Disney's profiteering from sweatshops on ABC News now that Disney owns the network?
Well, I'll try. I mean, that's incumbent upon me, and I think that's what I was talking about when I first started talking about censorship versus self-censorship. And I think, you know, the biggest problem is when people don't even ask. And I think that there's only been a couple of times with my previous employers that I have asked to do stories that I thought were important that they didn't let me do, because I can be so damn persistent that they will eventually give in. And sure, I'll give it a try. And I cannot say I'll succeed, but I think that when I've hit these brick walls in the past, and it's been a point of integrity, you know, I've made changes, including, you know, having to split. And I feel a personal sense of responsibility to try to do the tough stories. And I have found that when I try, usually they exceed. It's just that no one usually even asks them, because they assume that if you ask, you will be denied.
Can I ask a question?
Not right now. Just, I'm sorry. In early August of this year, I'm sorry, we just have to keep some play going here. In early August of this year, the 14th World Youth Festival was held in Cuba. 12,000 young people from 135 countries attended, including 1,000 Americans and 450 Puerto Ricans, who all broke the law to do so. This represented one of the largest civil disobedience actions in the last decade. CNN has an office in Havana, yet there was virtually no coverage anywhere in the U.S. My question is not so much why this wasn't covered, but how such uniformity, or the appearance of uniformity, occur in print, radio, and television. What pressures from what segments of society produces this outcome, Mark? Just seeing if you were listening.
I'm not going to forget that you asked me that question, because I don't know what the question is. Did that fit on a 3x5 card?
How do you explain the uniformity that occurs in print, radio, and television that in effect censors that kind of story?
Well, what kind of story was it again? You read it at a rapid
It's a
clip.
youth congress in
A youth congress?
12,000 young people from 135 countries held in Cuba, where CNN recently opened
Well,
a
you know,
bureau.
I can't say that I know anything about that particular story, because this is the first I've heard of it, right? That's the point, of course. But since I don't know about that particular story, I can't answer the question intelligently, although I know I'm obligated to pretend that I am, right? But I can answer the question in a very general way. I mean, there is a combination of factors that leads journalists not to cover certain stories. Some of it has to do with a crucial instinct to stay away from things that won't get you promoted, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Some of it has to do with a kind of consensus that emerges from the pack of journalists who simply bolster one another in shrugging certain things off. I mean, it can't all be ascribed to a particular cause or to corporate influence, but that has a great deal to do with it.
Did The Nation cover that story?
I don't know. Did The Nation
Did The Nation
cover
cover
that
it?
Victor?
Victor?
No.
I guess it was corporate conspiracy influence.
Well, I think it would meet most definitions of a non-story, except for the civil disobedience stuff. I mean, my friend Benjamin Truehouse, for example, who goes to break the the United States embargo on piano tuning in Havana, is a good human interest story by any standards. But look, there is no shortage of information in this country. You can find out anything you want, including what firm exploits who. And you can find it through the mass media if you wish. I hope we really are not under any illusion about what we're talking about here. We are drowning in information. The question is not what you think, but how you think. If I may recur to it. For example, have you ever seen, however, a story about Cuba, no matter what it said, where the lead was not, will this country, this island nation, become, or will it not become, more friendly to American interests after all this time? That is the line of the day. A reporter who doesn't write about Cuba in that respect won't write about Cuba at all. Take Farai's very good point about Charles Murray. I was the first person, I think I can say, in fact, I know I was the first person to debate publicly with Charles Murray on the bell curve. I was very, very keen that book got wide publicity. And I was sad that our debate didn't get as much as it could have done, because it is either true, according to these findings and others, it's either true that there's a great deal of race and class subordination going on in America to create an underclass, or it is true that the abused and much inseminated descendants of our former domestic servants are stupid, okay? One or other of these things must be true on the findings. And it's a very interesting discussion indeed, and it was very good for Murray to bring it up. Did you read one story that did not say that here is Mr. Murray and the late Professor Herrnstein, line of the day, first paragraph, introduction paragraph, without which the story could not be written or published, at last breaking the taboo of political correctness on this subject.
Absolutely
Then you
true.
can write about the bell curve. Then you can write about race and class. Then you can do it. It's not what you know or what you think, it's how you think and how you know what you know. It's about the construction of knowledge.
Do you
so
think...
it's idiotic for people to ask, and I hope you won't read out any more questions about, are you burying the truth about who is shareholder in your network? That's puerile, frankly. We've all moved beyond that.
I'm taking the questions as they come because I believe that the people here ought to have some chance to ask these. So, Katha, do you think at this point, with the corporate ownership concentration being what it is, that the major mass distributed news media can hold corporate America accountable? Be a watchdog over itself?
Well, it would be remarkable if they could. I'm not a very good watchdog over myself, so.
Until the consumers demand it.
So I guess the short answer to that is no, of course not. Why would they?
All right, question for Walter. Remind me again why you wasted so much space and resources on the dead princes. I'm sure there must be some rationale, but I can't for the lifetime remember what it is.
We did not do, I mean, we did two issues. Two covers.
Yeah.
Look, this thing, their rival magazines of our competitors have done 4 or whatever. I could make, and because I don't want to get too long on this, I could make a good case that was a compelling, interesting story that for a couple of weeks captured people's imaginations, and we covered it. Those of you who don't like it had a lot of other magazines to buy. I mean,
Not
I
really,
don't mind
actually.
it. I don't think The Nation or the, other magazines put her on the cover.
Yes, we
If
did.
your Nation put it on the cover, well, I feel, why did The Nation put it on?
Because it was my piece, too,
My
I'm
readers
glad
were
by.
interested. What?
The Nation put my piece on the cover.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
well,
I feel much better.
my piece on the cover.
Down with the douchebag superwomen.
Look, your point is that everybody in this country, including the media, overdid Diana. If you want, I'll tell you, everybody in this country, everybody in most of the world, including the media, overdid Diana. Yes. I mean, that's true. You have to then also say, and maybe it gets to what others on this panel say, which is that most people are interested in the lurid. Most people have bad taste. We in this room have good taste because we're so smart, but most of the unwashed masses out there have bad taste. I'm not exactly of that mindset, but I know it's sort of the mindset of panels like this, that most people out there in the unwashed are interested in the lurid or something. It is true that people were interested in Princess Diana. Do I think it was horribly wrong that people were interested in Princess Diana and the tale that went around it? Not particularly. I don't think that it was, it wasn't as baffling to me as the interest in, say, Jean-Benet Ramsey or even O.J. I think it was a moderately interesting tale of our time, And if we want to get all snobbish about it, we can say, isn't it horrible that all those people out there got up and watched the funeral and bought the magazines and watched the TV shows? And I'm sure you all would feel really good thinking how horrible it is these people cared about it. I don't particularly feel it was that horrible that people found that story interesting for a couple of weeks.
Well, Walter, it isn't, we're not really talking about the people who read the news. We're talking about you who generated it. You know, that there's a difference between...
I don't think I generated interest in that story. I think a lot of us in the media were somewhat surprised at the explosion of interest.
Would you be?
It is.
Let me interrupt you to say, Lane Bernardos, who was in charge of special, he was in charge
Yeah,
of
poor
special
Lane.
events
Nice
at
guy,
CBS,
too.
was not on this panel tonight because he was demoted as a result of hesitating for a few minutes at CBS on whether or not they would go live in covering the reported accident in Paris. So I wonder, Walter, if you had not gone on the cover, that's a true story, that's a fact. If you had not gone on the cover with Diana, would you be here tonight? Or would you be going back to Oxford?
Going back to New Orleans. Actually, I started work to make Christopher feel an ally of mine. I started work 22 years ago with Christopher in Dundee, Scotland, as reporters for the Sunday Times of London. So
true, and that's
shows how
result-
old Christopher is.
And the Lord Provost of Dundee, I think, is still in jail thanks to what Walter and I did.
Yes,
was
those
our
were in the
first
good old
meeting,
days
and
before I
maybe- in many
covered
ways our best
princesses.
one.
I did not have a particular. I think whoever, Norm Pearlstein or whatever, would have thought I was a bit kooky not to have put this on the cover of Time magazine. It wasn't much of a hesitation that when the Princess of Wales gets killed in a car crash, in a situation like that. I don't know. I didn't have second thoughts. I said, "Oh, that's a couple."
People who thought she was their Queen of Hearts and the People's Princess. No, they did not. They went wall to wall telling you she was Queen of your heart, and you were the people of whom she was the princess. Right? And not only was someone fired at CBS for not covering it wall to wall in the right way, but the New York Times television critic published a jeering article saying, why was CBS so late in going wall to wall on this coverage and making us all inclusive and part of we and us? Why did they do that? By then the BBC on the second day had gone back to normal programming, but every American network decided no. It's got to be Banana Republic. It's got to be one-party state. It's got to be we. So why don't you learn to ask an intelligent question? Then you can put Mr. Isaacson on the spot about what kind of coverage he gives you, not how much.
Let me combine what I think they come in this order, but let me combine what seem to me to be two intelligent questions.
But we will still give banal answers.
The barrage of cynical and materialistic messages from the media, which have the effect of convincing more and more people that there's no point in getting involved in political and social change movements because things will never get better. That statement, asking us to talk about that, blends into the next question. Why are we having this debate yet again? Walter Isaacson's protestation notwithstanding, we all know what the story is on corporate control of the mass media. Why aren't we, and I'm wondering about that, whether the we includes journalists or not, or is it presumed to include journalists and audience, why aren't we instead debating what the progressive agenda is and how we can further it? Mark, how about taking that?
Okay. I'm glad you asked that question. I would like to suggest that people try to get hold of an op-ed piece that was in Newsday on Wednesday that I wrote with Robert McChesney, who's a great scholar of the media, I think, in which we tried to propose a very basic program, a series of steps that might constitute the beginning of a mass movement for thorough and meaningful media reform. Certainly, in the past, as Kathy suggests and as Walter agrees, there was no golden age. I don't think it's fruitful to dwell on that because that argument is often used to prevent one from doing anything. Well, it was lousy then and it's lousy now, so I guess it'll always be lousy. Certain things have gotten worse, actually. Many things were bad to begin with and are bad now. Well, we have an unprecedented situation. We do. We have all the culture industries and our mainstream journalism dominated to an unprecedented extent by a very few huge profit-making entities, some of which are into weapons research. So I'm just going to make the following statement, which is just a very rough paraphrase of the piece that was in Newsday on Wednesday. The first step is to a world of global media, because I think we have to break these huge companies down so that people like Walter can be free to do the kind of journalism that he happens to be very good at. Nothing personal. This visual example notwithstanding, that's one. Two, until we can repeal the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and charge these corporations for their use of the airwaves and TV spectrum, as we ought to be doing, a regular toll. I think there should be a 7 to 8% tax on all mass advertising, okay, which is many billions of dollars. That fund would then help subsidize the following. Step 3, a genuinely independent, healthy public broadcasting sector, so that the managers of PBS and NPR don't have to go kowtow to the trogs of Congress or go whoring after corporate underwriting, which is another word for advertising. And public sphere should also include genuine community and public access stations, okay? 3, these corporations should divest their news divisions. You know, you can't expect reliable journalism from the likes of General Electric. Let's be realistic here, okay? That's impossible. And finally, an outright ban on all advertising to children, which is morally indefensible. We should follow the lead of Sweden, which bans such advertising. That ban, let me add in concluding, that ban may be overturned as a trade barrier, right? If we get our fast track and free trade sweeps the globe. So we have to be thinking internationally, all of us here, as well as nationally and locally.
Kathy, is Mark living in the real world?
Well, you might ask if someone believes that women should make as much as men for the same work are living in the real world, or if they should be able to go to an abortion clinic without having to face a lot of religious nuts or living in the real world. I can't really speak to the details of Mark's proposal. They sound pretty interesting. And of course, once you say Sweden, everybody thinks, oh yeah, sure, right, yeah. I think you have to start somewhere. So I think a question like that is it's kind of a downer, isn't it?
Well, let me ask you what it suggests the progressive debate the audience was asking about is up against.
Yes, it does. But I would add something too, is that, you know, I think that beyond the question of ownership, which I don't mean to minimize, there is also the question of politics. I would say that, you know, a major thing that has happened, we haven't talked about at all, is that the media doesn't just follow corporate lords up there. It also sets itself on the political spectrum, the way the political spectrum actually is. And the whole country has moved in some ways very much to the right. And it's reflected in the media, and it's partly created by the media, but it also is really happening. And so then you find, for example, Mother Jones. Now, you know, I read Mother Jones, and I think, well, am I reading the New Republic or what? You know, they're against affirmative action. They run a fawning portrait of Ward Connerly, who was the regent at the University of California.
By that piece.
Well, weren't you? Well, I was amazed.
I read Mother Jones to get re-energized.
Well, exactly. And you know, they have an editorial castigating progressive activists for being too atheistic. And I'm thinking, I wish, where are these atheistical progressive organizers? I want to give each of them an atheistical hug. So, you know, this is our media, and I could look at The Nation too, and I could point to articles and choices of, you know.
Go for it.
Well, you know, I mean, there is the like last week, and there was the article about how women journalists who are mothers shouldn't take dangerous assignments, but it's okay for the men. You know, I think that, you know, there is something going on with the alternative media, I'm trying to say, isn't so alternative. When I can go to the hairdresser and I can open Marie Claire, which is a corporate publication, and I can see a glowing tribute to female eco-warriors who risk life and limb, poverty and jail, and have children to protect the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest. And I turn to The Nation, and The Nation is saying, well, everyone should just stay home if they have a baby. You know, well, where am I?
Time Warner bought The Nation magazine a couple of weeks ago. Time Warner bought The Nation magazine a couple of weeks ago. It just hasn't come out yet.
I wish I could go on with all of these questions, but in the last 9 minutes, I'd just like to give the last word to the panelists because I denied them the first word almost 2 hours ago. And I'm going to give Katha the last of the words when we get through this. I'd just like to ask each panelist, starting with Mark, what is the question you wish or you think we should have asked tonight?
Oh, I don't know what question you should have asked tonight. But I have something to say to conclude, okay?
What is the answer you would like to have given tonight?
We used to see this on Johnny Carson. We don't have to do it tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the real world, okay? And I want to tell a story that may seem to you, Catholic, like it comes from one of your worst nightmares. But I was on C-SPAN debating this guy who runs a thing called the Media Institute, which is basically, I think, a front for the National Association of Broadcasters. They lobby against excessive regulation on the broadcast industry, okay? So he was there and I was there, and he kept saying, just, you know, no more regulation, everything will be fine. Every call that came in was hostile to the media. Every single call. Very few of the calls were progressive. Some of the calls were from Nazis. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I also got a letter from a guy who was a retired Air Force pilot and spoke proudly of the missions he'd flown over Korea and Vietnam. I mean, this is the kind of guy that I would not agree with about anything. But he was wholehearted in his agreement with the need to break these giants down. There's a populist strain, in other words, that sometimes may be odious to a lot of the people in here, including me, in certain ways. But if we're going to talk about the real world, and if we're going to do anything politically, ultimately, as far as the media is concerned, we're going to have to try to talk to a lot of very different people, that is, very different from ourselves.
Christopher?
If you ask what question should have come up and didn't, I would say that all the money that we read about, the dirty money, the supposedly soft as opposed to the clean and hard, Katha might want to interrogate that vernacular money.
Afterwards.
That's been washing around and robbing us of a political system or of a democratic election is all raised, of course, to be spent on the media, and you wouldn't really know that, would you, from the way that the media doesn't report it. So the fact that Dick Morris got his start, and in other words, Jesse Helms, his advisor, gets hold of Bill Clinton, not that difficult, and helps to run an election in a private sphere last year to run by and for fundraisers, is somewhat occluded from you as the voters and customers by the media, which is the principal beneficiary of the money raised. That, I think, would be a good question, really, for anyone to bring up if they ever get any airtime or perhaps a chance to call into their favorite local chat show. So there'll be that. That could have come up, should have come up all the time. Then I think we have to decide finally, we really have to decide finally, is the news editorializing or isn't it editorializing? Because I never can get a straight read on this. When I was a lad setting out in the business, they were said the news is the news. It's objective. It doesn't editorialize. You don't get editorials in the news. You get them elsewhere on other pages. Right. So, but we do Princess Diana this way because the public wants it. So that's all editorial. It's on the news pages, but it's all we, and it's all opinion. It's all how we're in mourning. It's not the news. It's an opinion. Same with Mother Teresa. So all right. Let's interrogate the theory of objectivity in that case. If you can say in a news story, Ronald Reagan is a great communicator, and you've all seen that in a news story, because it is a judgment of opinion, of subjectivity, then you ought to be able to say in a news story, Ronald Reagan is a liar, which is a statement of verifiable fact. The reason you will see one in an objective news story, because it's a subjective matter of opinion, and not the other because it's an objective matter of fact, is to do with the ideology of objectivity, which I have no time for this evening.
Good question. Go on.
Well, I'm going to just skip the question thing and go on to potential solutions, which is what I've been saying all night. First of all, for people who work in the mainstream media, as I do, and, you know, of course, I also do work, I mean, I have my own website. I work on all levels, but my main job is in the mainstream media. People in the mainstream media need to pitch and keep pitching. I will try to pitch a sweatshop story. Next week am doing a clean elections, clean finance story. If you ask, sometimes you receive. And so I think it's incumbent upon us in the mainstream media to actually not be afraid to ask to do stories that we think might be unpopular. For people in the alternative media, look around you. Look to the left, look to the right. How many people of color, how many gays and lesbians? I mean, we need our own housekeeping as well as, you know, critiquing the mainstream media. Third, work small as well as large. And by that I mean people say, oh, if I just write one letter, it won't matter. Well, that's why every week the letters column is filled with absolutely insipid, asinine things. So don't be afraid to do small actions as well as large ones. And the last one is recruit new news critics. And what I mean by that is that there is this generational drop-off in news reading and news viewing. And if we do not build the next generation of news readers and viewers and critics, there will be no one left to care what gets printed and what gets on TV. So try, whether it's someone who's 50 years old or you know, better yet, someone who's 10, to say, well, you don't read the paper. Yeah, maybe sometimes it sucks, but don't you think you should know what's going on? And maybe you could write a letter about it. Or maybe you could join with me and do something more important. So those are my 4 points.
Thank you.
If I sort of had a few proposals to follow on Farai's question of what we should do, I think the biggest problem we have in the mainstream press and even the alternative press is that we're so goddamn out of touch. We really don't know what people talk about in this country. We become snobby and elitist. You know, we don't really hear the type of conversations that go over a dinner table, most people. We don't get out enough, and we're too lazy, as somebody said. And I think we like traveling to capitals, and as Christopher points out, we like quoting the lies of official spokesmen. We don't really like spending time riding across this country or riding to different places in the world and listening to people and not feeling so superior to them that we get kind of shocked. And by the way, hold your applause because you're not going to like what I say next, that we get kind of shocked that they might be interested in, you know, the Princess of Wales. How could they, you know? And if you heard...
Walter, that was not the question. Not were they interested.
Yeah.
That was not the question. And should they be told she was their princess from dawn till dusk?
That was your question.
That was the question. That's the answer. That's the question.
I thought you thought the question was
no
banal.
No one says they're not interested.
All right.
It's a straw answer.
All right.
Straw answer.
I do think we get out of touch and get kind of elitist sentiments here about why are we giving people these type of things that they may be interested in, instead of looking at, and I'm now throwing the aspersions on us in the mainstream press, what type of issues really affect people? What relationships do they have problems with? How are marriages and families changing, or women trying to be independent changing? And what problems is that causing? And when we went into this business, I mean, problems causing for people, not for us. Yeah, you know, it's fun to laugh about it, but I think people are discomforted in this world today, and we're not quite sure why, and we don't see why they're interested in certain types of things. So I would suggest that we in the press spend a little bit more time not trying to distance ourselves from our readers, but understanding that they may be perhaps as smart as we are.
Kathy Pollard.
Well, as the designated elitist, I guess I think that everyone has a lot in them that never comes out, and they can be appealed to at the level of Diana, our people's princess, or they can be appealed to at the level of why is it that if you wear a union button to work, you can lose your job. And those are questions that the same person might be interested in. And one, I think the latter, has a lot more to do with their real life than the other. And I think that it's not elitist to say that journalists and the news media should use their brains, talents, and resources to give people actual information about their real lives instead of creating an ever more vacuous fantasy world in which they can live for a while. So I guess I think that it's not elitist to say all that. And that the mass media, I think Christopher's point was very good, that there is this kind of weird dance of populist elitism going on, where that if you want to say, let's look at something a little closer, let's cover this story in a different way, let's resist something a little bit, then you get to be the odd man out, the person who went to college, the person who thinks she or he is better than everybody else. But in fact, everyone in the media went to college. You know, it's a joke that anybody is truly connected with the conceived reader who weeps for Princess Di, although there are people in our social class who did that too. So I guess I would just like to close by saying I think it's really important not to indulge in a certain kind of stupefying populism, which is not the same as saying you should be elitist. I think you have to be honest about your own politics and your own intellectual ideas and your own perspective, and that's about as much as anybody could demand of another person.
Well,
Good response.
I hope you'll join me in concluding this with applause for the panelists for being here, for Victor Navasky and the nation for having them here, and to Don Hazen and the Media and Democracy Congress for bringing us all together. Thank you very much.
Someday I'm going to go watch the podcast. I do think that I can't say I'm going to be categorically wrong. but I think that-
No, you did very well in a very difficult.
Man, I tell you, me and the whipping boy.
Oh boy, yeah. Why'd you say yes? Victor must really...
I told Victor no 4 times. I even put out the
I did too.